Okay, I'm going to go over a few licks that you just saw in that solo. 3 licks, playing over a chord progression that is obviously inspired by Sweet Home Alabama. A very simple chord progression of D, C, and G. But the takeaway from this lesson is that we're taking a very simple chord progression and we're playing a lot of different scales and notes over it. So, for example, in the licks I'm about to cover, we have licks that touch on the Mixolydian scale, the minor pentatonic scale, the major pentatonic, the blues scale. So even though it's this very simple chord progression, we have a lot of interesting note choices in scales that we're playing over it. So that's the big takeaway here. Some really good things to get out of this lesson. So I'm obviously going to break all the licks down, show you the ins and outs of playing the difficult parts of each of those licks, but also talk about the note choices in the scales that we're using. So a lot to get out of this. Please check out the black belt version of this lesson on my site if you want access to the full solo that you saw at the beginning of this lesson. You also have access to an interactive video with tablature. You have access to download the tabs, and you have access to a backing track. I'm offering that a free trial for my website right now, free for 7 days to try out. I'm doing that for a limited time. So if you are interested, please check it out. With that, let's get into the licks. Here's the first lick. All right, so there's the first lick, and first the scales and notes we're using. This is basically using the scale of D Mixolydian. There's a couple places where we touch, maybe just one place where we touch on the minor third up here of D. That would be in the D minor pentatonic scale. But there's a couple other places where we hit notes outside of that. We hit the major third and we also hit the major sixth. So I'll point those notes out when I get to them in the actual lick, but this is basically a D Mixolydian with the minor third is basically as a passing tone in 2 places. So D Mixolydian. Now for the lick itself, let's break this down. The first part is a bend up and bend back. So it's one pick, back and forth. And when we come down, we hit the 13th fret on the first string. And that is the minor third of D. We only play it for a second because we go right to that to the 14th, which is the major third. So that's what I was talking about at the beginning, where we touch on the minor third just as a passing tone. That's the first place that happens. So once we get up to the 14, we're back in D Mixolydian. So that's the first few notes. Then we hit the, I'm at the 13 where I play the 13 on the second string. So that part's like that. That's starting with the downstroke when I'm hitting the 13 on the second string. And then upstroke when I hit the 15, downstroke on the 14 on the third string. in the 12 is just a slide down. Again, this is fitting right into the D Mixolydian scale. We get the flat 7 of D, the C, the 4th and the 5th. So right in D Mixolydian territory. Now we're in the 3rd bar of this lick here, where I go from 10 to 11 on the 3rd string. Notice that 10 right there, that's the minor 3rd of D. So that's the passing tone that's in the D minor pentatonic, D minor scale. But we're just passing through it just for a second, and we go right back to the major 3rd. So this is another example where we're getting right back into the Mixolydian scale after that really brief note there. So let me play it up to this point. And then the last 2 notes, so that's what we have so far. The last 2 notes, we slide up to the 14 on the 5th string, and then finally land on the G note here, which makes sense when you play this over the backing track. This is where we're playing the G chord. And if you're just looking at those notes that we are playing there, those last 2 notes, those fit really well over the G chord because this is the major 3rd of G, the B note here, and then the root G. So that spells out that G chord really well. So that's the lick. As far as difficulty and technique goes in this lick, things I would practice, always the bend. The bend always trips people up. Make sure you get that smooth and up and back. You're only picking one time, and you hit it exactly 1 step up. Another thing you can do there when you play that at the beginning, what I kind of did in the video is I kind of bent it up, bent it back, and kind of bent it up a little bit again before I went to the 3, the 13th fret. And you can even bend up on the 13 a little bit too. Experiment with little bends throughout the lick. That's a cool thing to try out. Don't feel like you have to play it note for note here. Experiment with doing bends in different places. Something like that. Just spice it up a little bit. But that is the first lick. All right, in this lick, we are starting off in basically D major pentatonic, and then we touch, we go back to that D Mixolydian type shape again. When we're playing over that, we're actually playing over the G chord, so you can really look at it like G major, but just for ease of explanation, we'll just call it we're using the D Mixolydian scale here. So let's go through the lick, starting in this D major pentatonic shape up here. We're climbing up 14, 16, 14, 16 on the 4th and 3rd string. So downstroke, upstroke, downstroke, upstroke, really easy. And then we land on the D note, the 15th fret on the 2nd string. Then 16, 14 in the 3rd. Then bend up on the 17 on the 2nd. So far, we're basically just D major pentatonic territory. Then the next 2 notes, 15, 13, That note right there, that is the flat 7th of D. That means we're back in Mixolydian territory. Then bend up, half step on the 14th fret on the 1st string. That is just a half step up bend, and that's the major 3rd right there. That we're starting off, and then we're bending up to the 4th. So now here's the really tricky bend here, and the bend that I think sounds really cool. We bend up 17th fret, a full step. I hold it and bend up a half step more before I bend back down. So it's like this. So whole step up, another half step up after that, then all the way back down. That's a really tricky thing to do if you've never done those compound bends where you have multiple bends within a single bend before. Takes a while to get that down. By far the hardest part of that lick, even though it may not sound that way, it is. The next notes we get into, we're still in D Mixolydian, basically G major. We're playing over the G chord. So just a little hammer-on pull-off on the 14 and 15 on the 1st string. Downstroke, upstroke on the 17, 15 there. Then a slide up to 16. And then land on the 15 on the 1st string. Notice there, those last 2 notes, we're playing over the G chord again. And those notes, just like the last lick, really spell out that G chord really well. This is the major 3rd of G, and this is the root of G. Same lick, just an octave higher. So that's it. Technique-wise, what to practice here? Definitely the bend. Definitely that 1.5 step bend. Practice that a lot to get that down. Just play that one little thing. Play that over and over. Something I've said in my other videos, when you're testing bends to make sure you're hitting the notes right, hit the bend up and then play 2 frets up. That's a full step. Should be dead on. I was a little off there. And when you get up to 1.5 step like this, you can do like this. Right? Just making sure you're nailing those bends exactly on the note. Bends sound terrible if you don't hit the note spot on. That type of lick can sound absolutely incredible, and it can sound terrible if you don't nail it. The other thing, technique-wise, that little hammer-on pull-off section. I like, when I practice technique, I like to do circular patterns. Circular patterns seem to work the best for developing speed and dexterity. That little lick right there, a really good exercise for just developing. You can use different fingers and different positions and different scales and all that. But just playing that little pattern, if you're working on dexterity and technique and getting that down, those little circular patterns help a lot. So that's a good little small lick to practice. All right, that's the second lick. Right, this lick, we're basically in D Mixolydian, D minor pentatonic. So like I said at the beginning here, we're kind of touching a lot of different scales here, which is really cool. This is a good example of being able to play a song and not being locked into one scale the entire time. We're being creative and using different types of scales and different types of notes and getting unique sounding licks throughout. We're not being boring. So this lick starts out basically D blues, D major pentatonic, D dominant pentatonic, I guess you could say, because we got the major third in there. And then it's basically just straight D minor pentatonic after the first few notes. So starting at the beginning here, we slide up to 11. That's the first lick. And this is basically the first note's a major third, so that's the one note in this lick that is really major. Basically minor pentatonic from here on out. When I play the 10 and the 10 on the first and second string, I was actually playing that with my middle finger on my right hand. So the 10, the high D on the E string here, I was plucking that, and then when I was hitting the 10 on the second string, I was doing that with the pick. So you can even do the 13 bend up with your middle finger too. I've been playing a lot more with my finger, doing hybrid picking. When I play certain licks like this, it feels natural. It feels more smooth than picking every single note. I just like the sound and feel of that. So definitely experiment with that. I recommend it. And it makes this lick a little bit easier too. So that's the first lick. Then again, D minor pentatonic straight away, bending up in the 13th. And then a little triplet. It's a 10 on the first string I do with an upstroke, and then 13-10 pull off. Bend up in the 13 the first string, and then downstroke, upstroke on the first string. So we got this. Now we're in the third bar of the lick here, and it's this right here. So that's 13 downstroke, then bend up on the 12th fret, half step up, back, and then pull off. In the rest of the lick, I'll also say here, downstroke, when you on the 13 on the second string, that's a downstroke, then upstroke on the 10, and then downstroke on the 13th bend up. And now we get to the monster part of the lick, this really, really fast, basically blues scale run. As we get the flat fifth in there. So starting in the 10 on the first string, upstroke, then downstroke, 13-10 pull off, downstroke on the 12, and then you can, when you do the 13-10 pull off back on the second string, you can either do another downstroke, like an economy pick, so. Two downstrokes in a row. You can also do an upstroke too. And then the 12 on the third string, the 10 on the second string is downstroke, upstroke. So you could also economy pick that as well. So you could economy pick the 12 to 10 on the third to second. So there's economy picking. Here's not economy picking. So you can do either one, whichever feels right for you, whichever one you can pull off. You know, if you don't have economy picking the feel for that down, then there's no problem. You can get away with this lick without economy picking and still play it pretty quick. So that's fine. And the next part of the lick is just pull off 13, 12, 10 on the third string. That's it. And then 12 on the fourth string to 10 is a downstroke, and then upstroke on the 10 on the third string. And then land on the 12 on the fourth, finally. So that last part of the lick is basically this. Notice there I actually picked the 13 and the 12 when doing this. I did this. I usually pick that note. The way I tabbed it out here, I did all pull-offs, which is fine. But I tend to pick that note too. So that's it. And then the whole thing together is this. And let's try and do that a little bit slower. You can only slow down that last one so much. It's a pretty fast lick. So obviously, technique-wise, probably the best thing to practice in this lick is that last pentatonic sequence. And when I practice pentatonics now, what has worked really well for me to build speed and be able to play things like that is just play, again, circular patterns like I was talking about in the previous lick. Just going up and back the top few strings of the lick, play it at a comfortable speed. And what I do is when I practice it, I'll set a metronome and I'll do eighth notes, then I'll do eighth note triplets, then I'll do 16th notes, and then depending on the speed I have at the metronome, I'll go up to 16th note triplets if the metronome is at a speed where I can actually play that. But that seemed to work out really well for me. Just starting off slow and just getting the technique really good and building up without changing the speed of the metronome. That has worked out well. So basically it works like this. I get the metronome going, so at that speed, right? So that's 8 notes. Then I do 8 note triplets. There's the tick again. Then 16th notes. So I'll just play that little simple lick back and forth, and I'll just play through the different speeds, and then I'll go back down to triplets, and then back down to eighth notes. And I'll do that over and over again. That's basically my daily practice routine when I'm practicing, just warming up with technique and getting my hands warm. I'll pick a scale, and I do that with normal scales too, and I just go up and down through it and just try and get it really smooth and play at varying speeds without changing the time of the metronome. It's worked out really well for me, so I highly recommend that. In any case, that is the third lick, and that is the lesson.